Hi, and welcome to Responsa Radio, where you ask and we answer questions of Jewish law in modern times. I'm Rabbi Avi Killip, Executive Vice President at Hadar, here with Rabbi Ethan Tucker, Rosh Yeshiva at Hadar, a center for Jewish learning and community building based in New York City. You can check us out and learn more at hadar.org. Okay, we have a question today that is going to bring together, I think, a few different angles of halachic questions that we can discuss. Okay, so the questioner writes, can one sell their plasma for export? The U.S. is a major player in this field. In fact, America isn't just a leader, it's the largest exporter of plasma. America supplies 70% of the world's plasma needs. To give you some context, in 2023 alone, the U.S. pulled in a staggering $37 billion from blood byproduct exports.
That's staggering.
They write, does Halakhah say anything relevant? Are there any specific considerations about use of blood in particular? And do we need to take into account the risk of taking advantage of desperate people who may not really be doing this voluntarily?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that last question makes us want to ask both, is this something we can do personally? And is this something that we should avoid being involved in the industry where it's happening, even if we're not personally the ones selling our plasma? So where should we start?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting angles here. And some of it, I'm not sure I or we are qualified at all to weigh in on the export angle and where are these things going overseas. And I don't know, some of that might have an impact on how you're thinking about the larger picture. But I feel like we have to start with, how do we think about this action of donating? Forget about selling first, like giving plasma. Is that maybe even obligatory, right? Let's start there. The question of what kinds of things are we expected to do for others, particularly as relates to parts of our bodies, right, that we give. There is this principle of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You're not allowed to stand. Usually it's translated idly by the blood of your brother. But it literally means don't stand on your fellow's blood. The way it's understood in terms of rabbinic tradition is classically it'll say, well, how do you know that if you see someone drowning in a river, or you see someone being attacked and, carried away by a wild animal, or a group of bandits are attacking someone, how do you know that you, the observer, the bystander, have an obligation to save that person? From this verse, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Basically, there's a requirement to intervene, right? To step in and to save them. That's what it means to have responsibility for the other people in your society. That's in the Talmud. It's in Masechet Sanhedrin, and it's uncontroversial as a broad principle. The piece that is not as clear is, well, how far do you go with that? So do you have to put yourself at risk to save someone who's definitely in danger? Or is it just being if you could, shell out some money in some way that is not going to affect you otherwise than draining some time and resources, you have to do it. And on some level, it depends how you interpret this case, right? What are you doing to save them from the wild animal? Are you charging the wild animal and starting to attack it? Are you diving into the river? Do you know how to swim better than that person? Are you a lifeguard?
Right.
All kinds of questions there. So the Haggadah Maimoniot is one of the medieval commentaries on Maimonides, takes this sort of at full depth and is I assume that some of these cases involve putting yourself at some risk of drowning, getting into a fight with the bandits, whatever it is. And this text teaches you that you have to put yourself at risk to save someone else. You don't have to forfeit your life to save someone else, but you got to put yourself at risk to save someone else whose life is definitely in danger.
So if we're in the realm of blood donation, right, if we take a step away from plasma selling and we go into blood donation,
Yeah.
it sounds like this is actually totally within the realm of like, yeah, if people need blood and you can give blood and it won't be very minimally problematic for you, this is something you should do.
Yeah, that would be the basis of really classifying it as not just like something you do on mitzvah day, but a mitzvah, right? That is to say, formally, maybe it's like, yeah, it's like perfectly safe to donate blood, even if you could say there's some like minuscule risk, but it's too small a risk, assuming, we'll get to this in a moment, assuming it would save someone's life, okay? But interestingly, the Hagahot Maimoniot is not where the conversation mostly goes. There is much more weight on the side of the conversation that says, no. Everyone agrees you are not required to sacrifice your own life to save someone else's life, okay? So, Chayecha kodmin lechaye chavercha. Your life precedes someone else's life. And an extension of that, according to certain thinkers, like the Radbaz, who's in 16th century Egypt, is that you don't even have to put yourself at mild bodily risk in order to save someone else. This is sort of like you're obligated to make the phone call. You're obligated to do whatever. The Radbaz has an extreme case, okay, admittedly. He says, what if you could save someone else's life by losing one of your arms?
Whoa.
Like, you'll be alive at the end.
Right.
Or even going through a process where you might lose an arm. No question you're going to survive, but you will be disabled. Do you have the obligation to do that? And he says, that is at most a midat chasidut. That is at most something where we feel, oh my God, someone who would do that deserves to be lauded. They're incredibly pious, but we would never actually statutorily require that.
This feels very relevant for like people who donate kidneys or are asked to donate kidneys, right? We like arms, have two of them, and in theory can live our lives without. Obviously different than arms, but I'm curious if people use this text to address that question.
100%, because you could easily, based on certainly a Hagahot Maimoniot type of orientation, that one that was like, you've got to put yourself at risk to save other people's lives, to say, well, maybe there's actually an obligation for every healthy person to donate one of their kidneys.
Yeah.
Because you can survive without it. There's a small level of risk and complication, but for the most part, like, it's pretty safe. And this will literally save the life of someone who otherwise will like be able to be on dialysis for a while, but otherwise will not be able to survive. And there, I would say, are a few voices here and there that like consider taking that position. But for the most part, poskim are not comfortable with that. So like Rav Asher Weiss, who's a contemporary posek in Israel, he says, listen, people who give kidneys as a donation are incredible people. I want to laud them. I want to honor them. I want to praise them. But this is absolutely not an obligation. And we'll get back to this part of the question later. And I absolutely don't want there to be any peer pressure on you to have to do it. So that you see there, this sort of question of the balancing of really on some level, is there some sort of prior right to like bodily autonomy to helping someone else? And is there some sliding scale here of, taking off the arm is like everyone's going to agree it's midat chasidut. The kidney, people are still mostly going to be like, I'm not going to require you to do that. But what about when we get to donation of blood? Does that start to be like, well, that's just stuff that like completely regenerates, right?
That's so easy.
And that's where some of the question of, do we have more of a thumb on the scale in those cases will come up. Though I will say, even there, most people who address these questions are very unwilling to say, barring medical, contraindications, you're obligated once a month to make an appointment at the clinic to donate a pint of blood. I just want people to be aware that I don't know if the Hagahot Maimoniot would agree with that. Like if he's saying you got to put yourself at a little bit of risk to save people, he might think differently about that. And it's a calculus that has to be made. Now, I would say there's another element, right, with giving blood, which is it's not as if you have a person in front of you who is right now about to die. By you giving the blood, they are going to be saved, which is often usually the way it is with like a kidney donation.
Yeah.
There's actually someone you're matched with, and you are saving their life, right? So on the one hand, the donating blood case is less aggravated. It's not actually losing a part of your body. It's not a permanent loss of a body part, but it's more aggravated in the sense that, well, you are like harming your body, at least locally, and taking something out of it for a remedy that is a couple steps removed. And so that engages that. But I think I at least want on the table, as we answer this question, we have to grapple with the question of whether the plasma donation, as it were, the blood donation, whether for pay or not, is a form of a mitzvah.
Yeah, I will say, I think the examples where it feels most a mitzvah, most clearly a mitzvah, I think are in moments of crisis and tragedy. I remember seeing a picture that someone sent of themselves in a line to donate blood after October 7th in Israel, that it was just like people were waiting for hours because they felt that it was an obligation to donate.
Right.
And I think some of that has to do with actually the speed with which it was going into the next person. It was like,
Right.
I saw the picture of the person who was injured, and I want to make sure that person gets what they need. There's a direct person, there's a direct need, and I have an obligation to step into that. I think that it was that sort of collapsing of the anonymity that maybe led to that feeling of chiyuv, of responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I also think, despite the distinction of like, are you giving it, your kidney to this person as opposed to giving it to a blood bank? And sometimes blood at a blood bank will get thrown out, right? Will get discarded and not be used. Nonetheless, anyone who understands how the sort of system at scale works understands that, but the way there is blood around when someone gets into a car accident and needs a transfusion is that other people at a calmer time came and put something into the bank. So I don't think we can make like too much of that, but we have to be aware that it's a factor, right, that we're thinking about.
Okay, so that's really in the sort of first level of question, which might be, is this obligated? But especially once we start to get into something like kidney donation, I know there's a second sort of level of question, which is this even permitted?
Yeah.
These are major sort of surgeries and not, you never know anytime you go into surgery how you'll react. Is this something that people are concerned about from not just obligation, but from a permissibility question?
Right. So look, we have a default position here that's important to kind of underscore, which is when the Talmud talks about torts and injuring other people and bodily injury to other people, it goes through a whole series of laws about how do you compensate people when you've injured them in that way. And in the context of that discussion, you have a statement attributed to Rabbi Akiva in one place that appears in other places. Someone who injures themselves, even though they are not allowed to do that, they are exempt from payment. Now, what would it even mean, like to pay yourself? And sometimes it might be compensating an heir.
To get the lashes for...
Right. There's different ways you can understand what's happening there, but the part of the sentence we care about is Eino Rashai. You are not allowed actually to self-mutilate, right? You're not allowed to harm yourself in that way. Now, harming yourself in general, right, in a statement like that is just sort of as like, I don't want to say for the hell of it, but we're not thinking about it in a context of, helping someone else, right? We're generally like,
Right.
are you allowed to like do stuff to your body that will harm it and injure it? And we start with a sort of core idea that like, no, you can't do that. Goes to this larger idea, who owns your body, et cetera.
Yeah, I think we did an early episode actually in our maybe one of our first seasons about, can I put myself in danger? Am I allowed
Right.
to do extreme sports? I think was the context of the question.
That's right. So that comes up in any number of places. And so you can say from a starting position, at least a concern you have to overcome is, well, what gives me the right to sit down, have a needle put into me, have blood, drained out of my body? What justifies me doing that? Rav Moshe Feinstein is sort of asked this question or engaged when he's thinking about the question of, well, am I allowed to give money to a blood bank, right?
Yeah.
Just on the core question of blood donation. And he sort of starts from that place of, well, I'm going to begin with some degree of skepticism because you shouldn't normally do things to your body that are bad. Of course, you do that all the time in the context of healing or medicine, but which is about, I need to do this in order to make you better.
Right.
But here, right, I'm quote unquote harming myself in order to help someone else. And there he does raise this question of, well, if you could tell me the blood was going right into someone who needed a transfusion, so then we would say, well, that squarely fits in the category of you're only putting yourself at risk, right, in order to save someone else. He's a little more nervous about the sort of time delay or it's sitting in a bank. But then he makes an interesting claim, which is local to the question of blood donation. He says, it's no longer our theory of science or medical practice, but people actually used to do bloodletting all the time for themselves.
Yeah.
He's like, if you read the Talmud, the sages of the Talmud are always, they're like, I can't meet you tomorrow because I have a bloodletting appointment, right?
It's the ancient acupuncture.
Right, exactly. So he's like, listen, it's no longer the way we do things, but given that people all the time sat and had blood drained out of them, I'm not sure we should treat it at the high level of this is self-harm, such that I don't have to worry too much about whether the blood is going to be used, it's going to get thrown out. He's saying we should probably think of blood donation as something as sort of along the spectrum of things that people did that they did not think was adverse to their health. One of the things that starts to get tricky here as we get to the selling piece is the more you make the donation of blood not a big deal, or the donation of plasma not a big deal. We don't think of this as harming yourself. It doesn't have any real consequences on the body. The more it starts to become indefensible that it wouldn't be obligatory, right? That is to say, there is a kind of economy here on some level of when the Radbaz says, well, you're not obligated to amputate your arm to save someone, there's a sense of, well, your body and your integrity is taking a real hit. The more giving blood is like taking a shower, okay, or just doing a process that will repeat itself with very little impact, it starts to become, to my mind at least, a more serious question of, well, how does it not become an obligation? And that, I think, ends up becoming relevant, as we'll see, for the question of the monetary piece of this, which we haven't yet tackled. Because selling something, we have a question of whether you can sell body parts, right, that I think we have to talk about. But there's also a question of what it means to make money off of doing a mitzvah, right?
Yeah.
And so how we classify this is then going to, I think, also have ramifications for how we think about its monetization.
Meaning the more I do it, the more normal it seems, so to speak. The more it starts to be a mitzvah for me, let's say.
Yeah, and you're putting it from the frame of reference of the individual. I think it might even be more generalized. Like, how do we think about this activity? Is it so easy to keep this activity in the neutral middle of it's neither prohibited nor is it a mitzvah? I think that there is a middle in there. That's basically how we think about the kidney, right? The kidney donation has come to a place where we think of it as it's not enough of a risk to you that it feels forbidden for you to do it. It's not going to kill you, right? So you're allowed, even though there is a risk of giving up a kidney, like if your other kidney fails,
right,
you are then in trouble. But it's a low enough risk that you can do this in order to save someone else's life. But we're also going to put it in that category of midat chasidut, laudatory behavior that's not a formal requirement. Fine, that may sit there. Does the plasma donation sit there, or is it so de minimis in terms of its effect on you that it starts to become like, well, if you're going to do it, it seems like you're doing a mitzvah.
Okay, so let's take it back then to that question.
Yeah, can I
sell my plasma?
Can you sell part of your body parts? So I'll tell you an interesting thing. There's not a lot of material on this. So it's actually interesting. Rav Asher Weiss, again, who I mentioned earlier, he is adamant in his position on this, but has relatively little source material to work with. He is adamant saying, you may not sell your body parts. But essentially, he does it by claiming you don't own your body.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not actually yours to sell.
But he would let you donate your body parts?
He would let you donate your body parts in the context of giving a kidney, right? Or things like that are going to save someone else. Mm-hmm. And certainly like after death, the right kinds of things. There's parameters, but the kinds of organs that can be donated and comply with other halacha concerns. That's fine. But to traffic in the body parts themselves, to say, I have a kidney, it costs $598, right? He basically says that's invalid. Like there's no ability to make that kind of a contract because you don't own it. Yeah. It's not yours. Belongs to God and not to you. Okay. Now you have other poskim who feel differently about this. You've got Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, who basically is like, if it's a situation where someone needs an organ, and the only way they're going to get it is by paying you, and the only way you're going to give it is by getting compensation, and otherwise you won't do it. The two parties are basically entitled to decide to do that exchange. All right. He's not really focused in the same way on the like who owns the body parts piece. So it's not a kind of theoretical, theological argument. But it's actually viewing in a way I think it's helpful.
He's saying it's a means to an end.
Yeah, and they're sort of viewing it from the two angles from which you can always view these questions. On the one hand, if you're asking just sort of dignity of human body, God owning the body, etc., then you'll say this is not for sale, right? The way we've concluded, even though it wasn't this way for most of human history, but we've concluded you can't sell people.
Yeah.
Right? People are not for sale. Their body parts are not for sale, right? End of story. And then from a different perspective, you can say, well, I don't understand. Like, this person wants to have their life saved by getting this thing. This person is willing to help out, but quite frankly, they can only take on the risk, or they're only willing to do it if they're compensated in some way. If the two of them agree, right, there should, quote unquote, be a market for them.
So the language of you don't own your body is so striking to me. Once we get to this place in the question, I feel like we have to start asking questions about socioeconomic stability. And is it different, right? Would you have a different answer for someone selling a body part because they are destitute and this is their only way to get money versus, they're more well off, they have more money? And if you read it through that lens, there's something almost mean about saying like, you don't own your body. It's like you have nothing to sell to get money. You don't even have your hair.
Yeah.
Like you have nothing, actually. that just leaves that with a different valence than like God owns your body, which is this like, it's hekdesh, it's holy, isn't that beautiful? It just rings differently if you're actually destitute to be told like, actually that last thing that you thought was the last thing you owned, which was your plasma, you don't even own your plasma.
Yeah. Now, there's a law and economics dimension here, right? Which is like, law and economics approaches are like, at the end of the day, the law can say whatever it wants. Markets will emerge based on people's needs and mutual interests. And the law can sometimes try to shut those down. I'm not saying I sign on to this as a moral orientation. I'm just saying the analysis here is that you can try to shut that down. You can do that for a while. But what you will do is just end up creating a black market. And in the end, if there is a real mutual interest among people in the market for something to happen, it will happen. And then the question will just be, is the state regulating it in a way that's going to be fair, safe, etc.?
This is a good time to take a quick break. We'll get right back to this episode. But first, I want to let you know about an upcoming program with Hadar that you will love. The Hadar National Shabbaton, January 30th to February 1st in East Brunswick, New Jersey. This is a Shabbat of powerful davening, engaging learning, delicious meals, and great kids programming. Come connect with an incredible network of people working together to build more meaningful Jewish lives. Visit hadar.org/Shabbaton for more information. Now let's dive back in. Well, so if we take it back into the halachic sources, my question is, does the halacha have any indication of the selling being different depending on who's selling?
Yeah. So I think it's not so much a question of who's selling, but there is a question. The law and economics piece here is, how do we think about what's happening when money is changing hands? And I'll give you sort of two angles on this. The first is, let's imagine for a minute that actually donating plasma is a mitzvah. Okay? Let's imagine that like this is a low-level problem, from our perspective on the self-harm or anything like that. It's really going to make a difference in creating medicines, saving people's lives, et cetera. And let's assume we feel good about sort of the direct benefit of where the plasma goes. And therefore, you basically have some obligation to do this. So we have actually a rich tradition of texts that deal with the question of, are you allowed to charge money for performing a mitzvah? Okay? Can I collect money for this if it is like a religiously, required obligation? You have this in the Mishnah in Bechorot. They're imagining someone who's involved in preparing the ashes of the red heifer for the purification ritual that people need. So someone's come in contact with a corpse. They need to be purified. You need to make sure there's enough ashes that have been prepared. What if the person who's like, gonna sprinkle on people and, go through the ritual, the Kohen who's gonna do that, says, that's great. My fee is $200 per sprinkling, per purification. So the answer is, according to the Mishnah, if they charge a fee for that ritual, the ritual is null and void.
Whoa.
Not like you shouldn't have done that. We repossess the money. It does not count. Okay? Now we can debate, are they claiming this on a biblical level? Is it a rabbinic penalty? But on some basic level, it seems to be saying it ceases to actually be a legitimate mitzvah or act, right, in any way, if you are charging for it. But by contrast, if the person who needs to perform the ritual is an older man and needs a ride on a donkey to be brought to you to perform the ritual, because he otherwise can't come, you pay for that transportation, and you compensate him for the time he is losing that he would otherwise be making in his regular job.
It's like I can comp his hotel room and his plane ticket?
Correct. He can't get a fee for the service, but you can pay for transportation, and you can even, the way like when you serve on a jury, you get some fixed amount a day, like $50 a day or whatever it is, imagining some, essentially, it's like if you had a minimum wage job for like the number of hours.
And this is like I always say I love a good halachic workaround. This is the halachic workaround, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
This isn't that they actually think that that's different.
So I'll give you the follow-up, and you tell me what's going on here. The Ramban in the Middle Ages, who is, among other things, a physician, okay, comes to the conclusion, he says, well, can doctors charge, right, for showing up and helping someone and healing someone? And he
has no stake in the answer.
Has no stake, right? So he says the following. He basically says, you can't charge someone for teaching them like medical information. You can't even charge them for the actual act of healing, because the doctor, when he can save someone's life, has a religious obligation to heal the person, right? This is another text, V'hashevoto lo, a verse that talks about returning lost objects to people, but it's formulated in a way that sounds like, you shall return him to himself, is read rabbinically as, if someone's life is going to be lost, as it were, like a lost object, and you could return them their life through healing, you're obligated to return their life to them. So the Ramban says, I can't charge a fee for healing you or for explaining certain kinds of information, but what I can charge for is the time that I lost, that I otherwise would have sort of, made money for elsewhere, and any expenses that were involved in getting to you or my equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
It's so validating to hear in the way that when we pay medical bills, it's like the only way that I'm able to justify it for myself, is the time thing is like, well, you're paying for the years they spent in medical school. Like You're not paying them for the hour that they spent doing your surgery. You're paying them for all the time they spent in medical school training for that.
Yeah. So, Rav Asher Weiss, when he's talking about the kidney donation as an example, or anything where you're giving of your body, so he'll say, you can't sell the kidney. He seems to feel like it would be better if it was just like no money changed hands. But what he can tolerate in light of these texts is to say, yeah, but if basically what they're paying you for is the time you're going to miss from work and the inconvenience and the difficulty, this will enable me to hire someone to help my family with meals during those days. It might then look like you're selling your kidney, but that's not actually what's going on. You're being financially enabled to donate your kidney. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I agree with you. It is a fair question. Part of that feels like a workaround, and it's a way we say something in order to maintain a principle, even though in practice, that's not what we sort of are allowing a financial exchange. And part of me feels like, at least as I was trying to narrate it, that is the reality of what people are doing when they come to some kind of financial arrangement.
Right. Well, it feels to me, you're putting these two next to each other, right? What about being a doctor? And what about donating your plasma? Should we be able to accept money for either of these things? Is we need to find a way for doctors to exist. We need to incentivize doctors having a career. That pushes me on the plasma question, I think, into a place of, does selling plasma exist because we need plasma in order to make all these different medicines? Or is it the case that actually plasma donation was doing fine and someone was like, I see an opportunity to monetize this donation industry, and they swooped in and made it really expensive?
Yeah. The money has to be flowing from somewhere, right? They could only monetize it if there's people willing to pay for it on the other end, right? That is to say, the clinic that's paying you to donate the plasma has to have a buyer that's paying even more on the other end. Okay. What did bother me looking into this, and where I feel like maybe the religious frame offers something here that is different from just the economic frame. I found one of the websites that facilitates this. And there are two things there that I did not care for, to put it mildly. The first is kind of a screaming advertisement of, hey, make money off your plasma. You could make as much as X per month. You've been waiting to get that extra car. A sort of actually like consumerist rhetoric around the entire picture that feels at odds with, certainly if we're in a mitzvah type of frame, feels like, selling the mitzvah. Even if we're not in the mitzvah frame and we're just in the Rav Asher Weiss, like, hey, I don't think you should be selling your body parts because they belong to God. Something about that whole consumerist rhetoric, right, felt off to me. Something that's an extension of that, but felt even more jarring was they were like, here's a debit card from our company that you can sign up for. And each time you come and give plasma, we automatically deposit the money and then go out and like use it on whatever you want. Where it starts to feel like literally the entire operation starts to be about like, how am I making money from this? I think if I were to think through sort of two guidelines on this, as someone that has not donated plasma, but I think that seem and sound right to me. The first is, I do think drawing the line between selling parts of your body and being compensated for your time is important. My sense is most of these outfits work this way, but I don't know if they all do. It feels to me very different if you are getting paid by the pint as opposed to by the hour. Mm-hmm. Is it like, we ask you to come in and you're going to give 2 hours and we compensate at this rate. If you come for 1 hour, it's this rate, as opposed to we're paying for a pint of your plasma. It feels like there is something there that is walking over the line of the selling body parts piece that does not feel right. The second thing is, it feels like the best outcome here would be if someone could go and give their plasma, get paid for it, and then give that money to tzedakah. Yeah. That would be a very powerful way of leveraging this system that has emerged to actually do something altruistic on the other end of it, such that it's very clear the payment, right, that you're receiving is not just about lining your own pockets, but enabling you to do something else. And there, I don't care that much, quite frankly, if the end result is you're giving this money to tzedakah, and as a result, there's some other money you were going to give to tzedakah that maybe you keep, but that you think of the amount of money that I got from this, which comes out to $67.85, whatever, dollars, that I know has been earmarked for tzedakah, because I don't want to get into a situation where either I'm selling my body parts or having a rate for doing something that is borderline a mitzvah. Yeah. And then you're sort of, in a way, able to do a double good of you've, quote unquote, donated your plasma and then use some money that fell in your lap as a windfall from that to do some other good for others.
Yeah, it feels like I'll officiate your wedding and you make a donation to my discretionary fund.
That's right.
Which you're giving me the money, but I'm going to use it for tzedakah.
That's right. Which I do. That is my modus operandi when I do weddings. Like, I don't take payment directly for weddings. And then the discretionary fund enables me to do other things, right, that are important. They may free up other things that maybe I would otherwise do. But yeah, it creates a very different dynamic, a different posture, a different relational orientation to the activity. In the case of a wedding, to the people who are on the other end of it. There's a difference between fee for service and leveraging resources that might come as a result of you doing something. I do just want to circle back to affirm, I think part of the desire to do that, and in particular, my suggestion on that donation front, is I do share the questioner's concern that you can very easily and quickly get into people being pressured and taken advantage of to use and sell their bodies, right? In ways that I think become very quickly very abusive. And it's important to note that some of the "you can't sell body parts" energy is a theological claim. And some of it is, I think, a sort of strategic socioeconomic claim of we don't want people being commodified in that way. There is something of putting a needle into your skin and extracting something from the inside that does still feel like we want to be very careful when we get to violating someone's bodily integrity, that we are not operating on a system of social pressure. And that's where keeping this in the realm of donations, even if money is taken and then redirected, feels like an important direction to me.
Yeah. It's really interesting. There's a lot here. I think by way of closing, I just want to sort of reiterate that we've spent a lot of time on the question of selling and not necessarily the question of where is it going. Mm-hmm. What obligation do we have to make sure that we aren't feeding into a black market, that we are donating and or selling plasma to people who are using it for reasons that we feel good about. All of those questions we've sort of left for future episodes, let's say. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have young blood. Don't you feel it in our veins when we're together?
Have a halachic question you'd like answered on the show? Email us at responsa@hadar.org. Responsa Radio is a project of the Hadar Institute. Thanks to Chana, Kupetz, and Jeremy Tabick for producing this podcast, and to David Khabinsky for recording and editing this episode.